Well, howdy there, folks. James, Political Friar, coming to you again. Got the University of Oregon hat on, and so we're going to do the political topic today, and it's the one you're thinking of. It's how to analyze the results of the Iowa caucuses. If you don't know, Donald Trump won the Iowa caucuses last night, and it was called 36 minutes into the voting, and it wasn't, it was an easy call to make. The AP probably waited longer than it had to at 36 minutes to declare Trump the winner, but Trump winning was never going to be the thing that we analyzed on this video. We were always going to look at margins and the exit polls, see if we can divine any sense of where the race might go from here from those numbers. And there's a couple of things that I think are consistent with what we thought reality was, and so we can maybe use them to predict reality going forward. But just some of the top line numbers: Donald Trump got 51% of the votes. And so he broke that 50% threshold that was important for him to say that it was a crushing sort of incumbent level win. I think 50% was a really symbolic number, and so mission accomplished there for Team Trump. Ron DeSantis got 21%, Haley got 19%, and Vivek got 7%. Oh, and Chris Christie got 35 votes. Somebody didn't get the memo on that one. But these numbers, everything that we're going to say about the Iowa caucuses has to be taken with a grain of salt because the turnout was desperately low. And that means that our sample is skewed to only the most dedicated, non casual voters, the ones who would go out into the cold and spend a couple hours in the evening on a work night uh, doing political stuff. To give you a sense of that, these this caucuses were decided by 111 total thousand people. The electorate for the general election is north of 111 million people. That means we're not talking about a large subsection of the American voting public. Indeed, it was only 15% of the eligible voters in Iowa. I mean, you get an election with 15% turnout, and you can't have really solid conclusions about what would have happened if you had more normal turnout, which in American presidential politics is between 50 and 60% now. 15 does not equal 60. So everything that we run through here, take it with a grain of salt. It doesn't necessarily mean we aren't in for a surprise. But some of the things that we see in the numbers also match up to what we might expect just from a qualitative analysis. So I think that those things that match with the narrative are worth flagging, because I do think that some of these numbers will actually pop through. And so, for example, if the biggest like odd number in the exit polls was the split in education. If the voter had a bachelor's degree, they were almost exactly equally likely to vote for Trump, DeSantis, or Haley. Considering that Trump won 51% of the votes, that means that he dominated the field among those who do not have a bachelor's degree. And that makes sense. The MAGA movement is founded on non-college whites. That's the base. The base is people who do not have higher education and are white. I mean, and so that is the definition of the Iowa caucus voter in a lot of ways. The majority of the people who showed up at the caucuses were non-college educated whites. I guess it's not surprising that Donald Trump dominated the field. Speaking of race, the fact that Nikki Haley did slightly better among non-whites than she did among whites is probably not relevant because only 3% of the electorate was non-white. 97% of those 110,000 people vote in the caucuses were white. Well, that means that it's difficult to extrapolate these results out to the general presidential voting electorate because about half of that electorate is non-white. And so the results here they're so skewed that 97% is white. You can't even like handicap it out to the general election. But it does. There is a slight indication that Haley would do better among non-whites than Trump or DeSantis, but not enough for me to put any money on that. Here's an interesting one though. Haley did better among men than she did among women. So I guess your non-college educated white female prefers a male as a political figure to a female. Huh. Yeah, I suppose sexism is working. Not necessarily among men, though. And then the other thing that I pulled out of the numbers was that all three, Haley, DeSantis, and Trump, were within shouting distance of each other among suburban voters. Now, Trump dominated both the urban and the rural voters. Somewhat surprising about the urban, but he dominated both of those. DeSantis did better than Haley among the rural voters, but all three of them were right there in the suburbs. And the conventional wisdom out there is that among the general electorate, the suburbs are the place that chooses the presidency. And it's probably true. Those are the purple areas. Those are the only places where you're going to find any swing voters is in the suburbs. You know that the urban areas are going to tilt heavily Democrat, and you know that the rural areas are going to tilt heavily Republican. And so it's in the suburbs that you have to show strength. And all three of these folks were about equally strong in the suburbs, which, when you account for Donald Trump's general, crushing advantages out in the rural areas, is interesting. It implies that both DeSantis and Haley probably are better general election candidates. But it also tells us that the people voting in the Iowa caucus didn't care about electability. They're or if they did, they're sufficiently out of touch with the sentiments of the general election, uh, that they thought that Donald Trump was going to be a perfectly good general election candidate. I'm here to say both DeSantis and Haley are better general election candidates than Donald Trump. They don't have as much baggage. They don't have the name recognition, which actually, when you're talking about swing voters, is a good thing. And they don't have the entrenched, motivated opposition. I mean, if you want Democrats to stay home and not vote, don't nominate Donald Trump. One of the reasons why the turnouts in American politics have been going up and up and up and up and up is because more and more Democrats are going out to vote. And that is motivated by the particularly polarizing creature that is Donald Trump. It's also going to be a little tough to get elected from behind bars, which could still happen. You can run for president from federal prison. W.E.B. Du Bois did it and got a couple 100,000 votes. So being in prison doesn't preclude you from being president, but it can't be an advantage when you can't go out campaigning. We'll see how that plays out. There's some equitable arguments that say even if Trump's convicted, maybe he shouldn't be sent to prison until after the election. We'll go into that in a different video. But where do these campaigns go moving forward? Well, first, Trump takes a victory lap. Good job. Win by Team Trump, hit the number that you needed to, on to New Hampshire as if the whole thing is already wrapped up. And quite frankly, it probably is. But on the narrow chance that it's not, the DeSantis campaign, it's over, Ron. You needed to do better than this in Iowa. You cannot be in a fight with Nikki Haley for second place if you want to beat Donald Trump. You're too Trump adjacent is the thing. Like, you're in Donald Trump's lane. You need to beat him for the nomination, not Nikki Haley. The supporters of DeSantis, buy his argument that he's Trump without the chaos. Well, that argument hasn't worked. Turns out that the chaos is probably a feature, not a bug. The Trump fans like the fight. They like owning the libs. They don't want good governance, Ron. It's not important to them. They're sports fans. They're not thinking in terms of what's best for the country. They're just not. They're thinking in terms of what's best for their guy. And what's best for their guy is to vote for their guy, not their guy light. So, Ron, you're going to move on to New Hampshire because you have enough money to do it. But I suspect you're going to have a real hard time raising money from here on out. You just didn't do what you needed to do to actually punch your ticket past New Hampshire. And I don't see I don't see South Carolina or Nevada in your future, Ron. I mean, Nevada would be the one place where maybe you could be competitive just based off of the priors, but I don't think so. So Ron DeSantis, I'm comfortable saying, will not be the presidential nominee for the Republican Party. Bold prediction. Nikki Haley, she, in the world where Nikki Haley becomes the Republican nominee, this is the kind of result you would expect. You would expect that the priors in Iowa would not up would carry through. That is to say, the prior opinion pro Donald Trump would have a huge effect, but you would start seeing the chipping away. And Nikki Haley moved from single digits, 1, 3, 5% support in Iowa, 3 months ago, up to 20%. That's a big jump. That means that she took a bunch of voters away from Donald Trump and a bunch of voters away from Ron DeSantis. And so if she can continue to do that in an electorate that's maybe a little bit less favorable to Donald Trump, maybe she can start convincing people that she's more viable. Her real test is New Hampshire. It's New Hampshire where the electorate is about as favorable as it's going to get for Nikki Haley, but this has happened in the past. John McCain rode a surprise victory in New Hampshire to the nomination in 2008, and it wasn't how it's supposed to go. I mean, John McCain lost badly in Iowa, won convincingly in New Hampshire, and then all of a sudden it was off to the races when you had a broader electorate than Iowa. Iowa's track record for picking the presidential nominee in a contested primary is pretty bad. Rick Santorum didn't win. Ted Cruz didn't win. It goes on. So the opportunity is there for Nikki Haley, but she does have to feel a little daunted by the margins. Like there are green shoots for the Nikki Haley campaign in the fact that the suburbs are on her side, and there are many more states with more suburbs than Iowa. Iowa's pretty rural, or at least they're winnable. Especially if Ron DeSantis drops out, I think they'd be winnable. Because there are a good number of conservatives out there who want the conservative message that Ron DeSantis provides, but are turned off by Donald Trump. And there is going to be a sizable, I think, majority of Ron DeSantis supporters that are voting against Trump as much as they're voting for Ron. And those folks will vote for Haley, even if Haley isn't, as right on the combative, attack the media, social issues. She's close enough, and she can play that person on TV convincingly enough that I think that if Ron DeSantis were to drop out, she would be the primary beneficiary. So going forward, watch for New Hampshire. It's going to be interesting because we're going to start seeing this dual track. Donald Trump isn't in New Hampshire today. He's sitting in a courtroom waiting to figure out how much money he's going to have to pay Eugene Carroll, and Haley is. And so that effect might start telling. Donald Trump is not going to be able to campaign as vigorously, energetically as Haley. And he's 78. Maybe he doesn't mind that so much, but it might have an effect. If the voters are genuinely open to being persuaded, Haley might have a chance. We'll see. If she doesn't do very well in New Hampshire, I'm not saying she has to win, but she has to be within like a single digit in New Hampshire, then the Haley campaign's over too. South Carolina, it goes back to being an electorate which, while not as unfavorable to Nikki Haley as Iowa was, is certainly not as good as New Hampshire. So she can't start building some real momentum in New Hampshire. South Carolina's probably not going to help her. And then Super Tuesday is the first Tuesday in March where a bunch of states vote. That's where you're actually starting to get consequential numbers of delegates to be awarded. That's when you would expect her to drop out. Anyway, it's just a thought. Let me know how wrong I am in the comments down below. Leave me a like, hit that subscribe button, and maybe consider telling a friend. Anyway, appreciate it. Thanks.